Hi, this is June Stanley, and this is my EDL 856, Module 5. My school is probably quite different from yours. I work in an adult school in a California state prison, so my population is different. Most of them don't have a high school diploma. Quite a few do get a GED while they're incarcerated. They tend to be fairly young, and most inmates in state prisons are men, and all of our inmates are men. About 2/3 of them are Hispanic or Black, and quite a few have mental problems. And as expected, their family life has often been really bad. Here are the boys. Lovely. Customs and traditions. Education, thankfully, is considered a neutral ground in prison. They don't bring their bad stuff into education very much, and we tend to see the best side of them. The inmates vary widely. You have some that spend their time out on the yard. We call them the knuckle draggers sometimes. And then you have everybody all the way up to those inmates who are trying to get their education, trying to better themselves in there. And race plays a big part in that. Change it's just a way of life in prison. Things are changing all the time at a moment's notice, and so you just get used to it. Here's a few pictures, one of housing on the bottom, their cells, and guys out on the yard. And if you were out on the yard, you would notice that they segregate themselves, Hispanics, Blacks, White. You very seldom see any mixing at all. They tend to stay to their own little areas. Communication between staff within the institution is pretty typical of a school, email, phone, and in person. I really, really like to walk down the hall and talk to somebody, get to know their names, their faces. As far as for the inmates, of course, it's pretty limited. They can use state and federal mail. It's all censored, and they can send things through the institution mail. We have a real high percent of men who are illiterate, either functionally or just completely illiterate, and we do provide education for them. That's been some of those who are completely illiterate, their education's real important to them. Here's some of the cell phones at our institution over the last year. They do get them in somehow. Community groups. Our institution really is a community in itself, and when I speak of community, that's what I'm talking about, because it's a very insular thing, a prison. And so the inmates and the staff together form its own community. The inmates that are in different classes for addictions and family problems, etc., they sometimes form groups because they tend to kind of open up in those. The college students tend to sort of stick together. And then the inmates form their own groups. There's a Not in My Life group, which is an offshoot of the Not in My City, Not in My State organization, which tries to prevent human trafficking. They form a veterans group. They form music groups. We have firefighters, because our institution provides firefighters to the state of California. And there aren't any particular groups that present a problem as far as I know. It's a lot more structured in a prison. Here are two of our custody staff who are very involved in the Not in My City, Not in My State, and they help the inmates. They sponsor the inmates in their Not in My Life group. The upper right is a veterans group, and on the bottom are some inmate musicians. Here are firefighters. California's had some terrible fires this year, and these men down in Southern California, the people call them the Angels in Orange. They work real hard, and we can talk about the drugs and the gangs and how some of these guys have done some really horrible things, but a lot of them have just done, a lot of them just gotten in trouble. They've had terrible upbringing, and they really deserve a chance. So these guys work really hard. They make $1 an hour. They bring in the big bucks. Here's our firehouse guys. They do the pups on parole, where they take in unwanted dogs and they train them up and they give them some love, and they parole them out. They adopt them out. So leadership. I see in our administrators some are just much better leaders than others. It doesn't really have much to do with their rank. And as far as the inmates, there's definitely leaders there. You have everywhere from the shot callers and the gangs that tell you what to do, tell the inmates what to do, and they better do it, or if they want to survive, all the way to those inmates who've maybe been in a while and they've gotten clean and gone straight and they're getting an education, and they're really a good influence on some of the inmates that come in and want to go straight themselves. Here's our warden on the left, and on the bottom, the woman is on the left is our principal, and the man behind her is one of our vice principals. So community leaders' characteristics. Certain people, whether it's the inmates in the community or community staff, certain people just know things, or they know who to talk to, or they know how to get things done. They know how things work. And so knowing who that is can really help things move along smoothly. So if I have a problem, I've learned who to go to. It may be an inmate who needs to talk to another inmate. It may be an administrator, maybe a custody staff. And here's some particularly psychopathic-looking inmate, upper left. On the bottom is what I think everyone thinks a cop ought to look like. And you notice they're all men. There are quite a number of women cops in our institution and all over California institutions. I've been really grateful to get to know them. They're very good people, the men and the women. And the guy in the upper right, you probably know him. Economic conditions. In a public school, I think if you want to know, you can find out where almost every penny goes. And prison school, teachers know almost nothing. We're given, we put in what we need, and we get it or we don't. It's almost entirely opaque. And as an administrator, I would try to open that process up. I would think if I had teachers who were leaders or interested in developing particular programs, they would need to know if they had the monetary support to do that. The political structure, statewide, our prisons cost a lot of money, and education's kind of a drop in the bucket. And it can be a tremendous return on that. For the amount that we spend on inmates, on each inmate per year, if we can keep them from returning to prison in the first 3 years they're out, we can save a lot of money. They usually, if they're going to reoffend, it's usually within that first 3 years. If they can make it past that, then a lot of times we'll never see them back. And so on reincarcerating them alone, we can save $4 to $5 on every education dollar spent. And that doesn't even count the amount of money that the state gets back through taxes if they get a job, getting their family off of welfare, being a father to their children, and just not stealing your car. So I just think that it's a great investment, education is. However, a lot of people still have a real negative reaction to giving the inmates anything for free. And I think if they just looked at it logically, money-wise, then we can really come out ahead if we educate these guys. Here's some of our very expensive prisons. Maintaining them, keeping guys incarcerated costs a lot of money. So prisons, there's definitely a lot of social tensions. The guys are crammed in here. It's not a happy place to live. Despite what people think about all the things they get for free, prison is really a miserable place to live. And there's a lot of guys with social tensions. There's rival gangs. So it's tough. They have very strict rules for each, not just gangs, but groups, maybe Hispanics or blacks or whatever, where they go, what they do, who they talk to, how they act, interacting with staff members. The Hispanics are very strict. with their members on how that they must be always polite to teachers. So it's interesting. A lot of tension there, and a lot of times it breaks out in violence. There's a lot of information on websites, a lot on tons of data on our CCC website, our prison website, and the California Correctional Education Records. There's information there. There's a lot of data. And then as far as information about our institution, once again, for me, conversations with staff, students, whether they're or non-student inmates, just getting to know people a little bit and just sitting and talking to them. It's amazing to me how much I've learned with that. Power structures in a prison. The cops in a prison, they have a military style training, and so that's a lot different from something you find in public education. Authority's a lot more rigid, but some people have different amount of power than just implied by their rank, and so getting to know people helps a lot. And then within the inmates, there's people that have more power than others. I've learned to be very careful about comments and actions, because if you say just the right thing, you can really get an inmate in trouble with his shot caller, with his group. And so things are very controlled in a prison by the inmates and or by the staff. Multiculturalism. Most of the schools I've worked in have been pretty white, Western rural schools. And so it's been a pleasure working in the prison where there's so many Blacks and Hispanics. And we're really not allowed to celebrate cultures in our classrooms, but the inmates miss their families, they miss their food, they miss their traditions, and they're real eager to talk about it. And if a teacher is willing to listen and create a discussion around it and to draw in other people, then you can learn a lot, and you can allow them to just simply by talking about it to celebrate their own cultures. Our power structures, there's a hierarchy within the state capital offices for the prison system, and all these people there answer to the governor and the state legislature, and those, of course, answer to the voters of California. And so depending on which political party's in power or what the mood of the voters are, things can really wildly swing one way or another. And so it depends. Certain bills that pass can have a big effect on how we operate, how much money we get, what we're allowed or not allowed to do. And then, of course, there's the flow of power from our state Office of Education through our warden, our principal, our vice principals. And then everything, of course, is also tied in with custody staff, because safety and security always comes first. Public opinion, since our voters and our legislators can have such a big effect, I really watch closely our actions of our legislatures. And I watch how the voters respond to the things that go on the ballots. And, someone's political affiliation very often speaks to the attitudes they have about prisons and about prison education, whether they're going to lock them all up and give them nothing or set them all free, the two extremes and everything in the middle. And as far as surveys go, I do survey my class every month. But once again, personal conversations are my best source of information. And you get a lot of information about things, about the educational issues and prison issues in general from the inmates, if they learn to trust you a little bit. Thank you for listening.